about myself. So I'm Johann. I have a background as software engineer initially, as you can hear. I'm French, and I started my career doing software architecture, and eventually became like CTO and co-founder of a company called Seesmic. Moved to the US and raised quite a bit of money, 16 million in total. Eventually, we got acquired by Hootsuite. We had a really nice roster of investors from Atomico Venture, Media Network, Salesforce, SoftBank. So that was a lot of fun. It was a very steep learning curve for me as a CTO and founder. Obviously, that's also when I did my first due diligence, actually, on the other side, obviously. And then I moved to Munich about 10 years ago. I was tech evangelist for a while, organizing some conferences around deep tech. Then I joined Techstars, where I got to meet the wonderful Hila, and we got to work together. And I have really sweet memories of that. I was managing the program in Munich, which was a corporate program with BSH. And nowadays, it's been about almost 5 years now that I'm doing tech due diligence, mostly for VCs, literally from C to Series B. More recently, I've been doing also more private equity deals, some pretty large one of traded companies. So the good thing is like you get to see a lot and a lot of things under the hood, which is really what we're going to talk about today. Aside from doing tech due diligence, I'm also doing CTO coaching, mentoring, sometimes most of the time actually of companies that I audit, and I'm also a CTO in residence at Techstars, where I've mentored over 350 CTOs in the last few years. So that gives me a nice way to find patterns in how teams behave and what they build. That's me in a nutshell. So the goal of this talk is to give you some tools, both at the tactical and strategical level. And I think both are needed, right? Like you need to have some quick tips, you need to have some like actionable insight, but at the same time, I think it is important to also take a step back at some point and try to understand better like how things are organized under the hood, which is what I'm doing when I'm doing a tech due diligence, right? And so eventually I had to understand the nature of what it is to build a company to do this properly. What I do is like I mostly do tech due diligence. It's not just tech though, it's tech, it's product, and it's team. So it goes more into like operational things than just purely technology. There are even things that I don't particularly do or I do at certain level, like such as code scans, or like looking at the code. A lot of investors ask me that actually, like, do you look at the code? It's like, well, there's too much code to look at, to be honest, at pretty much any stage. But what I try to do is try to understand like where can be bottlenecks, where can be things to improve a potential risk and so on. And eventually what I ended up thinking about is, in a sense, like what is a startup, right? Like at its core. And looking into that, I realized, well, it's just like another system after all. It's a complex adaptive system. And any company is like that. So what does that mean? It means that it has parts and it has a goal, and all of those parts need to work together to achieve the goal, right? If you look at pretty much anything around you, you'll find systems everywhere, right? Your body is a system. It's a complex adaptive system as well. It has multiple parts and they need to be orchestrated in some ways to produce an output. So a simple system actually looks like that. It's basically something that has input, output, and a boundary between itself and the rest of the world, right? So typically a company is an open system. It evolves in a market, which is the surrounding. It is defined by certain boundary, and it produces an output for its market. So fortunately for us, there is a lot of study and scientific research on what is a system and what is it made of? What are the sort of fundamental laws of systems? And that field has been created already a while ago in the 1940s, and it's called cybernetics. And cybernetics come from the Greek kybernetes, which basically means the person who steers a ship, right? And you need to have a certain amount of information to steer the ship properly. So at its core, and don't worry, I know this is a bit like dry and like abstract, but I do believe it's needed to really understand like what's behind, right? Like what's under the hood. So at its core, like a system is made of a controller, which is there are things happening in there, right? Like so, in any given organization, you're going to have subsystems, and they sense their environment, they do some actions, and they produce an output. And then there's a feedback loop that says like, hey, actually, we need to change this because the output is not quite like we expected to be. And that forms a system essentially and its subsystems. So when you sort of pile them up, like suddenly you have something that almost feel alive, right? Like an organization. So essentially, when we look at the properties of a system, there are obviously many properties that can be defined, but like some very important one, well, it has a goal actually. And if you look at the startup, it has a goal, right? And the goal actually might change along the way. But if you look at an early stage startup, the goal is to find product market fit, right? It's to find a place in the market where you deliver value to your customers, and in exchange, you get something back. So as I said before, you have input, you have outputs, and so some ways to get like feedback and control. So now if we tie that up to a product market fit, what does that mean in a system perspective? It means that your output, or the output that your system is doing, has to be beneficial to a higher degree system, which is a market, right? And in return, this market is going to give you something back, which is generally a form of income, right? And so in a very dry way, a product market fit is that. Probably you've never heard it that way, but it's pretty much what it is. And so now let's talk about the core of our topic today, which is what are the investors looking at when they look at your company? Obviously, team is very important, right? Like, and at Techstars with Hila, when we are being asked, like, what are you guys looking at? We say team, product, traction, market, and idea, right? So team is fundamental part here at an early stage because that's what makes the system, essentially. That's what drives it. Traction, obviously, is how well the company can produce an output that is needed by the market. Right? The market is also important because it might have like markets which are saturated with the same sort of companies. There's competition and so on. Generally, those three first topics are being addressed during like the first few calls with investors. Obviously, you're going to present your company and like try to draw a picture of like what you're doing, how does the team fit in that, and so on. And eventually, at some point, it is important for the investor to they get excited, like they love the team, they like the good traction. But let's take a step back and look at at data really, and let's look at the risk eventually, and what is the value creation? Are there any defensible assets? Are there any intellectual properties, right? Like those things are very important. Intellectual properties, particularly in the age of AI, are becoming extremely important for investors. I'm literally giving workshops these days on like, where is the IP in AI systems, right? It's not that trivial. So essentially when you approach investors, this is roughly how it's gonna look, right? Like you're gonna pitch, and then you're gonna have like a bunch of calls to screen pretty much the company, and eventually you get to due diligence, and they can be of any form, by the way, right? Like you don't have to be just product and tech. Actually, at an early stage, it is very often that there's no tech due diligence. But there's going to be financial due diligence, there's going to be commercial due diligence, and so on. And eventually, if everything is fine, we get to investment. So what are due diligence really? Well, it's a way to look under the hood, right? Like and have a cold look at like the operational aspects of the company. So it really relies on data, and it can be done in a way that is fairly systematic, where you can really screen the whole like tech and product and more obviously aspect of the company under a pretty cold eye. Let's put it that way. And so what are we looking at as auditors when I'm getting a call from an investor? Generally, the first thing we'd like to know is, what are the risks, right? Like, are there any risk in this company? Are there any red flags? And generally, if I find red flags, I would directly call the investors and say, hey, we have this situation going on. Let's talk about it. A lot of time, the investors actually, they want to know if the company do what they say they are doing. And that is even more true when we talk about AI systems, right? Like companies say, yeah, we're doing AI, blah, 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 blah. And the investor is, but is this like real AI? Is it like just a wrapper on top of ChatGPT? Like they don't really know, right? Like so they would call someone like me to have a look under the hood. And then it's important to understand where are the bottlenecks eventually. Are there any things that block the growth of the company in a way that if we inject money in it, it's not going to be used to full extent to solve issues? And I see a lot of chat messages, so I'm just going to quickly look.
No, everyone's just introducing themselves.
Okay.
They're doing everything that I want, but I wanted to go on with this great and give them the actual tips. I want everyone on this call to be able to be investor ready as soon as possible.
Cool. Thank you. And then like obviously are there any potential risk in the investment? So a lot is about gathering evidence, right? Gathering data. And the result that I try to bring is really about this mental picture of the company. And there are many tools to do that. That's one of them, where what I'm going to do is try to look at what's happening. What are some events happening in the company? It can be like something around like the bugs in production. How many bugs are coming into production? And are people, do they have like focus time at work? Are they often interrupted? Like, so I'm going to try to gather a lot of events based on documents that I'm going to ask the company. And then I'm going to try to understand the connection between those, right? Like, and it's almost a detective work if you think about it. And so to get ready, it means that you need on your side to do the work of like gathering data, because as soon as the tech due diligence starts, or the due diligence in general starts, the timing is very compressed. You're gonna need to deliver a lot of elements in a very short time. So the one thing to be ready when you say, okay, we need to get some funds, what are the steps to do that? First, I would say, obviously, like, having your pitch deck and so on is very important, but starting to gather information about how the company function in more detailed ways is going to be extremely important, and organizing that in a certain way. And then equally important, it's about knowing what you don't know, right? Like, because there are a lot of things that you don't know about your business, about your technology, about your roadmap, and so on, which is fine. But only if you don't know, if you know about it, right? Like, so you need to have an understanding of where you lack and to have a plan on how to fix it. And that's going to make a huge difference in the eyes of the auditor and of the investor. If I say like, look, this CTO, clearly there are a lot of things that I'm not done at this moment, right? Like, for example, there's no testing, there's not process for this or that, but he's aware, he knows about it, and he has a plan. That's very different than having something where I'm like, yeah, actually the CTO has no clue about what kind of process should be implemented, how to scale the team, and so on, right?
So, Johan, I see a question here by Rafael. Rafael, are you on the line? Do you want to ask it yourself?
Yeah, pleasure. Hi, John. Thank you very much for this talk. When you say that we need to prepare the data and gathering the data around documentation that you will assess, do you have a specific checklist that from a startup perspective we need to get ready for? Can you share
absolutely.
A bit about
Yeah, I have that. It's quite a long list, I have to say. So that's why it's not in there, but I'd be happy to share it afterwards for sure. And I can, maybe once I'm done with the slides, I can show you a glimpse into it. So essentially, and that's also, I don't really talk about my specific process in that, because you're gonna find different auditors have different processes, right? Like, but I think there are common elements. Like, one is the data room concept, right? The data room is where you're gonna store the documentation that can be accessed by the auditors, by potentially the investors. Most of the time it's gonna be like a Google Drive, right? Like, so let's demystify the word data room. there are some data room like providers that exist out there, which are like a bit more secure than just a Google Drive, but it's generally for like later stage companies. So data room is extremely important. You need to structure it properly, right? Because I'm gonna spend a lot of time in there, like trying to go through like the documents. The more structure you can put in there, the more organized data room is, the faster I can work and extract insights, right? Then a second element that I have is I call that the data request questionnaire. And that's a lot of questions that sort of, again, try to paint a picture of the company. And it's a bit annoying to fill up because it's, I think the last time I counted, I had almost 350 questions. But it's also a very important exercise for you as a founder to go through that and see like, okay, oh yeah, actually, I never thought about this part, right? What I will do is I will also give you the link to, I wrote a book actually on like tech due diligence because obviously I have a lot of funders who ask me, but like, what are we supposed to know? What are we supposed to give as information to the auditor? And there's not so much information around that on the internet. You'll find some articles, but I wanted to condense everything in a book. So I'll give you this this address. But yeah, maybe let's talk a little bit about different stages of companies, because the way investors will look at them is going to be slightly different, right? And the way I'm going to look at them is going to be a bit different. So if maybe to start with, like, if we just look at technology aspect, right? Like doesn't even include product. This kind of what's in my brain, right? Like when I look at your company, like the different topics that I'm gonna have to dissect to see like how far along the company is on every of those. So in the middle, you'll find the expert points, which are really, you know, everything that touches the technology, your architecture, your infrastructure, like do you have mobile app? How do you manage data? Do you have AI? What is the architecture of the backend, of the front end? What is a deploy system, the disaster recovery system? Do you have an API? And then they are like, for each of those points, I will go through those transversal topics, right? I will say like, okay, what is the tooling? How well is this tool? Like, is there any technical debt that we need to understand and talk about? Are there any governance aspect that can be data privacy, that can be security aspect? Well, indeed, cybersecurity is a big one. How do we do quality insurance for each of those, right? And how documented the whole thing is on every of those points. And on top of that, I will look at what are the feedback loops. That's what I was talking about earlier about that, because it is certainly very important when you think about it. You need to understand how the system behaves when you make changes, right? When you iterate on something, you need to measure it, and you need to instruct the next iteration loop with what you've learned. And obviously looking at the processes and how well they are sort of scaled in the organization to make the whole thing happen, right? So let's talk a little bit about seed. So the seed stage, generally speaking, it is quite rare that I do tech due diligence at seed stage, but it's increasing, to be honest. It's increasing also because the size of the rounds have become bigger. So of course, there's a bit more scrutiny, depends also on the market dynamics. But essentially at that stage, the biggest goal is to find product market fit, right? And you find that through iteration most of the time, because it's really rare that you have the idea that as a product market fit, like you're gonna need to iterate on it. So that's your first goal, is to find that. And a company at that stage, they need to optimize for the speed of iteration. You have a certain amount of capital, your runway, and this runway is conditioning how many iterations you can have. So obviously, the more iteration you can have, the more you're going to learn as well, and the more chances you have to crack this product market fit. And a few characteristics at that stage is that it's definitely a test in adaptability and resilience of the team, because a lot of things are going to change, right? Like you're going to pivot. There's going to be some early tension about, hey, but like, no, I don't really agree with like how you see things and so on. So sort of like the early days, and those things are being tested somehow. What we generally see is that the founders are mostly in a reactive mode. They just react to events happening to them. And there is a bias for speed versus stability, right? If you optimize too quickly for stability, you're actually gonna get in trouble, right? Because you probably are not far enough into your iteration. And another thing that we see at that stage is a lack of processes, which is also fine, right? Like because the more processes you're gonna have, actually the slower you're gonna get as well, which is really not the goal of this stage. So the challenges that I see generally at that stage, and there we can really talk about like how to overcome that and in a way to be like investor ready. Sometimes you see like quick funding team, right? Like a bit of pressure is applied, like at some point there's going to be some tension. As soon as the tension comes in and there is pressure, like some communication will fail, and maybe you'll figure out that you're with the wrong people and so on. Maybe not, right? But it's definitely a discovery phase, also in how you can work properly with your co-founders. And sometimes you know them for a while, and since a while, and like everything is fine. Then a big aspect, and I'm giving this talk like I don't know how many times, including like in all the accelerators, is about premature scaling. It's basically when you build too much complexity in your organization because you behave at a stage you're not in already, right? Remember, at that seed stage, your goal is to optimize for speed of iteration, and you're gonna be judged on that, right? Like, or at least by me. Like, if I see that the system is too slow, that there's not much agility and so on, at that stage it is problematic, and it needs to be fixed. I think having at that stage also like a clear definition of a decision and hypothesis framework is very important, because all you got are hypotheses about what you want to do, right? Like, so we think that if we do that, like this will happen. And the more you can formalize that to be data driven, the better chance you're going to have to understand what's going on, right? Same with the lack of instrumentation. Like, again, it goes back to being data focused. What is a lack of instrumentation? Well, basically, if you don't really gather data in your system, it's going to be problematic, right? Like, you need data to inform how the system actually works. Are you talking to customers, right? And those things even though they are not partially like tech oriented, I would definitely have a look at, because if a company is not talking to customer on a frequent basis, you can be sure they are developing too much in isolation, and that product market fit is going to be very difficult to reach. Sometimes at this stage, there's also like a lack of tech team, right? Like sometimes it's just like two business co-founders. They're like, oh, we can outsource, and it can work to some extent, right? Like at least for prototyping phase, it can work. At this stage already, like when things are a bit, still you already have like a few customers and so on. You're going to be careful with outsourcing. It is not something that is well perceived, generally speaking, by investors, because there's a lack of alignment. If you think about it, the incentives are not aligned between people building the technology and the goal of the company. And another thing that you generally see there is that the product processes are not so well implemented. So that leads to waste. And with that, it's very common at that stage, because as much as the CTO position is generally not something you're gonna improvise, the product position most likely will be sort of improvised at that point, if you don't have someone really strong with product inside the team. Someone will be like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. Yeah, I like product, but it can lead to a lot of sub-optimization and a lot of communication issues with the engineering team, and that creates waste, right? Because suddenly you have like back and forth with engineering. Engineering is like, oh, but I thought that you wanted that, and the product team is like, oh, but I thought you're gonna do this. And there you see a lot of work being done twice, sometimes even 3 times. Frustration is building up, and it's really not a good situation. So if we look at that, I think what you need to be ready for at that stage is you need to have a way to make decision and hypothesis about where next you're gonna go. You need to be able to measure that, and to be at least like, to have a certain focus on data collection. It is not optional. You need to be aware of the stage you're at, and not start to build some complexity and premature scale some of those dimensions, because eventually that might kill you as a company. And you need to talk to the customer and have sort of a process to do that, right? Like I will definitely ask, like, hey, can you show me some qualitative feedback from your customers, even if you don't have any quantitative ones. Like, I still want to see something, right? Like, do you do calls with them? Are you logging those calls? Are you transcripting them? How do you extract the insights from your customers to inform the rest of your development? And I'm gonna have a quick look at the chat. Okay, I'm gonna take a pause here, maybe, and answer some questions.
Okay, question time. Not every day you meet someone who's done so many DDs. So what do investors actually look for? Come on, we have great alumni here for questions. Okay, then I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
So Johann, give me an example of something very frequent that you see, some common mistake that alumni make or that founders make when they approach investors or VCs in their materials.
Mm-hmm. I think it's there's a lot about knowing your numbers. And when I have someone who knows their numbers, that being honestly like a CEO, but also a CTO, right? Like when they know the numbers, I feel more trust somehow. I have something to rely on. It's not just gut feeling, right? And sometimes what I have when I do due diligence is CTOs who are like most of the time my main counterpart is going to be CTO, right? Like during this process, and when they are being vague, when they are being when they're not backing up what they say with something concrete, I start to have doubts, right? And that is not good. Like trust is very important in this process in terms of, can you trust the information that is being delivered, and can you trust the person saying it as well, right? Like so with as Dila said, like I've done so many due diligence that eventually you get good with also reading people, right? Like the choice of word is going to be important. You need to be sure of what you're saying, and if you're not, that's fine, but then say it, right? Like be totally transparent and say like, look, I don't have this data, and it's a very good point, let me get back to you on this, instead of making up something, because that will always make you look bad. Because when you do that, the other person is gonna ask more questions, and then like you're sort of like piling up kind of concealing things or feeling not so good in the conversation about what you're saying, because you cannot be more precise than what you are. And so ego is a big thing in there, right? Like just put your ego aside and make sure that if you don't know the answer, then say it, and it's okay, right? There's no weakness
yeah.
in there.
So I see that I did miss a few questions in the chat, thanks to Claire here, who's always on top of things. So I see Vivian also had a question. So if you can just start your camera though, Vivian, you want to ask? No? Okay. Yeah? Okay.
Hi, my name is Vivian. I would like to know how to close an investment deal, how to move from an introductory meeting, a venture capital firm, to closing the deal.
Okay. So I mean, as I said before, right? Like it's you have a certain number of steps that needs to happen before the deal closes. And I'm generally like one of the last boss, right? Like if we look at it through a video game perspective, like you're gonna have a bunch of auditors that are going to look at everything that you've done and comment on that to the investor. And then the investor makes the last decision, obviously based on this information. I don't know to which extent it answered your question, Vivian, but maybe you can be more add some more details to it.
Yes, of course. So what I asked is how to move from a VC to closing the deal. I work for a startup, Israeli startup, B2B food startup called Efficient Protein, and we raised capital. And I wanted to know how to move from an introductory meeting or from a follow-up meeting to close the deal, to progressing with them, and to closing them and with partners.
Okay. I think that's more a question for Hila actually, and for me. But yeah, maybe Hila, do you have a perspective on this?
Yeah, I think we'll try to keep that offline so we can talk about all that, because we'll keep it to the subject of this, which is DD and product and technology. And you and I, we can take this offline. Also, I see that Or had a question. Or, are you here?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. You hear me?
Yes. Can you switch on your camera as well? Yeah.
Yeah, my camera's on.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
So hi, nice to meet you, John. My question is this: what tools do you use to actually check the facts, or what the founders are telling you? Because you know, especially Israelis, they can tell you stories, but how do you actually check the facts? What tools do you use, or how do you gather the data yourself to actually understand what really is beneath all the layers?
Right. That's a really good question. So generally, let's take like a series A typical deal. As I said, like I'm gonna ask about 350 questions, right? Like through a document. And then I'm gonna ask for a fairly long list of documents. I think it was over like 50 of them. And I'm gonna start to cross-reference this information, right? That's the first sort of layer, is for me to build this mental picture without even talking to the team yet, of like what I understand about the company, where there might be potential like bottlenecks or like things that are unclear, that I need more details on. Generally speaking, in order to being, not lie that too much, I ask for a lot of screenshots, typically. So screenshot of like your backlog, of your CI/CD pipelines, and a lot of things like that, to get a bit more assurance on the data side. And then I do interviews, right? Like, and for a typical deal, I will do between 10 and 12 hours of interviews with the team. So that's gonna be, in general, like 3 to 4 hours with the CTO, but then also with like product people and with like engineers, including junior engineers, right? Not it's a bit stressful, obviously, for the team, but that way I better understand the dynamic. And if I have questions where I'm not entirely sure, like I can get different perspective on it. It's very difficult to lie at scale, right? Like you need to be extremely well prepared for that, like and coach everyone to say the same thing and so on. So that's why I'm asking a lot of information, that because eventually it is very difficult to to lie on a lot of different things when you're being asked so many questions and so many people are going to be involved in the process. Does that answer your question? So the mental is my brain, right? Like when it comes to that, I've been using more and more, like, and I've seen that there are some questions about it in the chat.
We don't have a lot of time, but I see a really interesting one. All the questions are really great questions, and of course, I'll share Johann's details with you, and you can write to him. But I see that Vitali asked something about the tools used and maybe AI. Vitali, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Hello. This is not so. It was answered about AI. Johann said that the brain is the key tool. And another question, I've met several times that some sources of finding some money of founders are not normal money. Do you check the sources of another fundings in the project?
I mean, I don't because it's not my part, but there is a financial due diligence normally that is being done, where those sort of things need to be checked. So obviously, the source of a lot of things is gonna be checked, right? Including of your supply chain of like software component, for example. It's a big source of scrutiny to know like what kind of libraries that you're using and like open source component, are they licensed properly? Can that create like a legal issue or not? So there are a lot of things around that are being scrutinized. And for sure, like the money laundering aspect normally are checked by the financial due diligence.
Okay, so
yeah.
we're running out of time. Just you can take your presentation off so we can see you again.
Yeah. I mean, I had some other like on Thursday, but like okay.
Yeah, it ran so quickly, right? So you can see Johann here all the way from Munich. And here you can see our amazing Ariely community all online. I want to remind all of you that we're doing a lot of activities, a lot of events. If you didn't sign up to our newsletter or to our LinkedIn and to our alumni group, yes, if you are our mentor or if you know great mentors, please send them our way. Connect with me on anything. And this is just one of many, many events we will be having together. I will share with you tomorrow also Johann's email, and you can write to him. And just so you know, we have a lot of global connections for you. And everything that we're doing here is to try to create more value for both of you, for all of you. So it was great to meet the ones that I don't know. Thank you again to the amazing Ariely team. And thank you to Johann for just putting everything together for us so you can fundraise. Johann, any last words here?
Yeah, I just wanted to share quickly like this document. I'd be happy to share it with anyone who asks for it through LinkedIn. So that's sort of like the kind of document that I'd be asking when doing that work, right? Like, so as you can see, there are quite a few things. It's probably like around 60 documents or something. All of them are just like screenshots and whatnot. But yeah, so the more you have, generally, like the more confidence as well. Like auditors get in the process. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's amazing
it
to
went
have
really
you.
fast.
It's amazing to have you. And it's really exciting. Join us and be in touch with us for much more content on fundraising and on becoming more successful as our entrepreneurs. So thank you, everybody, on behalf of Ariely Capital, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Johann,
thank you so much.
love you, man. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.